First-person shooters have always been hit or miss for me. Usually people split themselves into either the modern camp or the retro camp, but I see myself in neither camp. I find that both sides are flawed in their own way. Ultimately though, the most overrated first-person shooter is arguably Call of Duty 4. But what's the fun in talking about that game? I'm going to talk about another game that's overrated. Serious Sam: The First Encounter. Serious Sam is generally considered to be the pioneer of the 1 versus hundreds of enemies kind of shooter, but despite all of this, the series has quite possibly the most lackluster level design I have ever seen in a video game, both aesthetically and structurally. Enemies just spawn in huge masses and charge you, forcing you to backpedal and unload all the ammo in your automatic weapons, because nothing else is going to work, unless you're fortunate enough to have a cannon that is. There are tons of weapons in this game, and most of them become pointless later on in the game because the enemy waves just become tremendous and nonsensical. What I mean by this is that you'll enter a room and 100 bulls will spawn, so you have to kill them. Once they die, 100 kamikazes will spawn, and finally, once they're dead, you have 100 harpies to fight. Finally, you can move on to the next empty room to fight 1,000 clears. There's practically zero structure to this game at all. It feels more like a fan-made mod of a game than an actual game itself. Ammo is just dumped in piles and you just pick it up then back away from the hordes of enemies as you fire at them. Did I forget to mention that the game is brutally difficult as well? But of course it is, because as we all know, every game should be frustratingly hard or it's a bad game. Well, that's what everyone but me seems to think nowadays. I fucking despise this game's difficulty. It's either super dumbed down or insanely hard. There's no middle ground. Easy is way too easy, normal is way too hard. Where's the balance between the two difficulties? Because of this, you are constantly backpedaling and don't even think about going forward because you will get surrounded and die. You can't strafe fast enough to avoid such huge armies. You also move slower than the enemy hordes too, so they will eventually catch up. You just gotta pray that you can kill them all before they do. I hate this approach to gameplay so much. Movement is a key part of what makes a shooter fun for me, and when you take that away from the player and force them to constantly backpedal, it's annoying. You can't bunny hop to make yourself faster either. Enemy projectiles are often homing and require you to shoot them, and that's if you're lucky, because the Scorpion enemies have hit scan weapons. The worst have to be the clears. They're always numerous, and if they get near you, you are absolutely fucked. I'd rather deal with the biomechanoids since they are at least easy enough to dodge. Kamikazes are just dumb as hell. It's usually just a matter of playing a 360-degree shooting gallery where if you miss or face the wrong direction in a split second, you get blown up, so you have to make sure to kill them the moment they spawn. This gets so unbelievably tedious, it's a nightmare. I honestly think that these games get way too much credit for what they are. They just come across as being completely bland and uninspired. The levels are mostly flat, barren and empty squares of nothing. It's as if the developers just didn't care about the level aesthetic or design at all. Let's contrast this with an underrated first-person shooter, a game that is part of a series you all know I love. Now, I could just bring up Painkiller, but that game isn't exactly underrated, rather it's underappreciated. My underrated pick would be Painkiller Overdose, a game that is hated on for having a lot of technical issues. Now, Painkiller Overdose is technically the sequel to Painkiller, but unlike the original game, it was developed by Mindware and not People Can Fly. The game suffers from long-ass load screens, save bugs, and frame rate issues. For this reason, I can completely understand the hate that this game gets. Unlike Serious Sam: The First Encounter, however, the levels are fantastic. If you played the original Painkiller, expect more of the same, but with an aesthetic that is more wacky and silly as opposed to dark and atmospheric. In a way, one might argue that Painkiller Overdose is the Serious Sam 2 of Painkiller, except this game is actually fun to play once you get over its technical issues. I absolutely adore the weapons in this game, your first weapon being the head of the demon that jailed you, which is the most badass thing ever. You can fire lasers from the head's eyes, and the alternate fire has the demon head scream at enemies, killing most foes instantly. There are even wackier weapons to unlock later on too. Some are different variants of the weapons from the original game, like the Razor Cube, but there are a few new ones that make the gameplay more interesting and fun. While the level design isn't the best, the aesthetic of the levels is amazing. Like the original, there's so much variety here. You're going to be visiting all kinds of locations, almost like time splitters. You have levels such as Asteroids, which takes place in the future, Nuclear Plant, which takes place in a modern day setting, and Haunted Valley, which has a fantasy medieval setting. You never know where the game's going to take you next, which is exciting. Of course, each level comes with its own unique enemies to fight, just like the original, so you're not fighting waves of the same enemies time and time again. Each new level offers something new, and you will have to figure out the best way to take out these new foes. Some enemies are reused from the original Painkiller and Battle Out of Hell, but they don't feel out of place. I honestly think that if you enjoyed the original Painkiller and Battle Out of Hell and were left wanting more, that Painkiller Overdose is certainly worth a shot, but if you are content with the original, then maybe you'll want to pass up on this one. Ultimately though, it's an underrated gem if you ask me, but I do understand people's grievances with it. It's certainly better than Painkiller Redemption though, that's for sure.